Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on managing continuous performance testing in your CI/CD pipeline. Again, we're just going to do a quick mic check just to make sure that everyone can hear us okay. If you can hear me, if you can just give me a hands up, as well as you can see my presentation slide. Awesome, the hands are going up. Excited to see that. So today your presenters are me, I'm Mary Nguyen, I'm the marketing manager of our performance testing tools. We also have Emma Barbera on the phone, and she's our solutions engineer. She'll be taking you through the actual presentation as well as the demo of Load Ninja later on in the presentation. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we start. So this presentation is being recorded today, so you have to hop off for another meeting, or if you're afraid of missing any part, don't worry about that. We are happy to send you a recording of the presentation after the webinar. Additionally, if you have any questions during the presentation, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to put your question in there, or if you're more comfortable in using the chat function, either one works well for us. We'll try to address all of your questions before the end of the webinar, but in the case that we don't get a chance to answer all of your questions, we'll make sure to reach out personally. We also included a link to our load testing experts Calendly link. There's a 15-minute session that you can book. So anytime if you want to have a more in-depth conversation about your use case or load testing in general, you can click the link, which I will put in the chat box just after I pass this presentation over to Emma, and you can directly schedule with our load testing expert. So welcome back to all of our customers and users. We always love having you here. For those who are joining us for the first time, I just want to share a bit about SmartBear with you. SmartBear tools are synonymous with quality across the entire software development lifecycle, from planning and design to testing and monitoring. We were founded in 2009 in Boston, Massachusetts, and have grown to over 11 global offices encompassing North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. We have over 6 million developers, testers, and operations professionals from 20,000 plus companies like Google, Royal Bank of Canada, and Vineyard Vines. These companies and others use our tools every day to deliver bug-free software. Our company of over 500 employees also provides five free tools from the community, including the 3 wildly popular open source tools like Swagger, SoapUI, and now Cucumber. So here you can see that our entire portfolio. We span across Plan with Hip Test and Swagger Hub, Create with SoapUI Pro, LoadUI Pro, and Test Left. I'm sorry, yeah. Test with SoapUI Pro, LoadUI Pro, Test Complete, Load Ninja, and cross-browser testing. We have the partners that we work with employing. We can monitor with Alert Site, and finally, you can manage and analyze with Zephyr. So just really quickly, I want to give you a rundown of the agenda for today. We'll start off with why do we do continuous load testing. We'll go on to talking about executing in load test automation, and then we'll give you a bit of a demo on integrating Load Ninja and Jenkins and managing tests in Zephyr for Jira. At the end, we'll go through questions, and as I mentioned before, we'll include a link where you can schedule time directly with a load testing expert to discuss your use case or any other questions you might have. So at this time, I'm going to pass the presentation on over to Emma to start.
Get started with what is continuous testing. So we like to start here with a use case. So a few months ago, the final Avengers movie came out and it rattled the world, crashing websites left and right when tickets were available for purchase. Needless to say, no one was excited about this. And the crazy part about everything that happened with the Avengers movie and all the websites crashing when people were trying to buy their tickets is that this was 100% predictable. So the build-up to the release of this film, coupled with the popularity of the last couple films, would have led to the conclusion that people could have guessed the first couple hours of ticket sales was going to be a lot of traffic on the applications that were selling these tickets. In this case, many teams either knew that they were going to reach their breaking point, or they could have planned for this in advance. So what we saw is that there wasn't a lot of preparation for what was going to happen. So the real problem that we're facing here is this resulted in a lot of lost business value, and it really came down to whichever sites had the best performance were able to get the most ticket sales and the associated revenue that comes with that. In this day and age, as consumers, we're really used to a certain level of performance, and it really just goes to show that the power of performance and how it can act as a differentiator in today's market. So that's what we're going to talk about today so that we can make sure that you guys are able to prepare for these types of things and not experience that in your application. So we'll start with, what is continuous load testing? So continuously performance testing helps us to identify, learn, and control risk to production applications. Application risks generally cause much larger business risks, whether it's financial or something more intangible, such as brand perception. What we need to do is start load testing much earlier by focusing on smaller pieces of the system, perhaps not integrated yet, but which still can be tested. Additionally, we can load test builds that are coming out of development and entering into our delivery pipeline. By load testing earlier, we're able to understand and analyze the performance at the component level, which is an easier, highly repeatable way to test. And also, this way you're able to get a feel for your overall system and tackle production problems around availability, scalability, and reliability. This provides valuable insight into production behavior and can help validate the risk mitigation load testing you did earlier during development. So, before we even code for a product, we should be thinking about planning for performance requirements, but it's not possible to test absolutely everything. So we have to take an approach to discover what aspects of our application we should be load testing. And one of the big questions is, why shift to continuous load testing? And it doesn't make sense to run through the benefits of continuous load testing without first addressing that this fits well into an agile workflow. An agile workflow is what empowers teams to release in a shorter period more frequently and ultimately amplify feedback so you're able to continuously improve. It's able to, if we start with iterating often and getting this feedback earlier, we're able to get a jump start on making sure that our application is ready to go in situations such as, the ticket sales of the Avengers movie. So ultimately, with the agile workflow, teams want to move at a high velocity and increase feedback while maintaining or optimizing the quality of their applications. So the next question that we have to answer here is deciding what to automate. So we can't automate everything, like I mentioned before. For certain things, we're just going to need to have a human element involved. Some of these things include, ad hoc testing, usability testing, and exploratory testing. These are all things that you can do manually. It's pretty hard to automate some of those things. So those are things that you can definitely keep as a manual process. But things that are iterative in nature and that you expect to be continuous over time, for example, before every build, you should be going over things such as, the critical end user transactions. These things include the logging capability, the checkout capability, anything that provides, big value to your application. You're going to want to make sure that you're able to performance test these things and that you have your scripts ready before every single build ships so that you can make sure that those critical paths have the optimal performance and they're operating as they should be. So we're just going to launch a quick poll here, if you don't mind answering that before we go into our next step here. All right, perfect. Thank you, guys. So the next thing we're going to talk about is becoming successful with load test automation coverage. So now that we've spoken about why even automating, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we can actually become successful with load test automation coverage. Typically, this is an important topic because when you ask your senior executives or your business analysts, or maybe even your QA managers or your engineering team, they're going to want to take a look at this information, and they're going to say that, you know, they want you to automate everything that you can, but realistically, it's not possible to automate everything. So as practitioners, it's up to us to really understand the level of automation coverage that we can realistically offer that can insulate our end users from identifying the performance issues on their own. Making sure that we're, you know, more confident in our builds while simultaneously giving us the flexibility to maintain these automated test suites. So we'll start by talking about different types of test coverage. The first aspect of this is really looking at it from the product coverage. So, you know, what are the key functional areas of the product that you have tested? So in the case of an e-commerce application, for example, you'd want to look into the account creation, the login, the add to cart, the checkout. These are all the critical paths that you know that your end users will be taking, where the end user comes into your application and where it's likely to use your product. The next topic is the risk coverage. So along with product coverage, we have to make sure that we also cover risk coverage as well. So this is essentially looking at things more from a monetary perspective, or, you know, from a business perspective, in which saying, you know, outside of the, we need to look at it from the monetary perspective. So we're able to see not only the critical, you know, paths that we see taken most often, but also the paths that maybe not a lot of people are taking, but if they do take these paths, and if our application's not performing correctly in these situations, if there are functional issues, then what happens is, you know, there might be a lot of loss because of these actions. So even if it's, like I said, not the most frequent path that's followed, it could be, you know, different situations that, if they're not taken care of, could cause a lot of issues for your business. So you can generally use the classical definition of risk to determine what the coverage should be in terms of the application. And having this outlook is pretty interesting because it definitely opens up your eyes to potentially finding paths that people may take not as often, but if they do, they could be, you know, some major business loss. The next thing that we want to cover here is the 80-20 rule. So this rule in Agile is a flexible solution that helps make the development process more efficient and more reliable. Essentially, only a few main variables actually affect the outcomes, and most other factors will return little or no impact. So with this in mind, it becomes easier to measure and prioritize your load testing efforts. So with this rule, we're essentially saying that, you know, for many events, roughly 80% of the results come from 20% of the causes. So if you're able to take some time and identify 20% of all major critical flows in your application, then that's a really great place to start to become successful with your automated test case creation. Because if you can manage 20%, you know, and that's not as much effort as trying to cover 100%, that's able to produce 80% of the results. So you definitely want to, you know, take some time to understand where to put the effort to identify the 20% of the key critical areas that need to be part of your automated suite. The next thing that we're going to talk about here, I just want to put this into practice, is we're going to take a look at a simple case study. So, for example, if you know that you're working with an e-commerce application, the first thing, of course, is to look, and we've talked about this a couple times now, but we want to start looking at things like the average paths that people are taking. So we want to map out the typical set of expected user transactions that are, again, part of your core functional jobs to be done in your application. The main value drivers for what your application does. This could be, for example, the signing up flow, the first thing that people are going to do in your application, and then, maybe the steps in which they take to update their credit card information or say add a credit card to their favorites. There could be multiple transactions with the high-level steps that we map out. So at this point, let's assess the percentage of usage among the actual users. So you'll start with identifying these steps, and then the second step is to determine the percentage of usage. So, there's certain flows that you have even before you update to your new features. Look at the current status of your production and application, and then let's see in the flow that you have just mapped if we can assess the percentage of active users that are taking those paths. So for existing features that you have, you'll be able to take a look at, the traffic and the usage. And typically all new features that you'll add will pretty much touch on those existing workflows. So even if you maybe don't have exact numbers, you should be able to estimate, the percentage of active users that will be taking those paths. So even right there, just at step 2, you're really able to identify a good set of flows that need to be part of your everyday testing. And so in this way, you can use the principle to identify the scenarios that yield the highest value for end users. And then we do have step number 3, which is optional, and you're able to assess risk when users have bad experience in transactions. So in this way, you can actually put a dollar amount to the things that are going on in your application. So the next question that we're going to tackle here is why to automate the load testing. So if we dive down into the actual load testing automation process itself, setting up the projects, making sure that you configure load tests, applying the load, and finally analyzing the results. So I know we've spoken about understanding the coverage. That was the beginning of this webinar. And now let's speak about actually doing the execution of the automation itself. So with faster development life cycles, you're able to reduce the time spent in the testing phase of development drastically. And this is going to become, a part of the workflow and not a bottleneck. The next thing is increasing test coverage. Building testing into your entire application to increase quality while still not increasing test time when it comes time to deploy. And then the third thing is faster time to resolution. So you're able to get instant feedback from test results back to the development team for faster bug fixes and reduced time triaging. The next topic that we're going to cover here is becoming successful with load test automation execution. So another thing that we notice is challenges as practitioners are something that you're going to, face as you start the path to automating these test cases. So there are really a couple things that you have to take into consideration. For example, automation is usually a priority, but it's seen more as an aspirational goal. And this is mainly because automation can be difficult. There's challenges that will come up in the process, whether it's budget, tools, team culture, responsibilities, or even the ability to implement a fully automated flow. Maintaining your automated flow is also something that takes time. So there are a lot of factors that can seem daunting and intimidating. So we're just going to cover a few ways to overcome the automation challenges. So one of these challenges is, script creation and maintenance takes anywhere between several hours to a few days. So the solution for this challenge is to create scripts from the browser perspective. And what this really does is it allows you to not have to focus on the dynamic correlation or programming in order to play back your tests. In Load Ninja, you can, record your test cases and then play them back instantaneously. So you don't have to spend a lot of time after you create that initial test case to then propagate, session IDs or things like that throughout your test cases. The next challenge is that translation time is long during handoff from performance tester to developer. So really what that means is after you run these load tests, if the results are not easy to interpret right off the bat, you're going to have to spend a lot of time taking a look at those results and creating them into useful tidbits that you can pass along to your developers. So solution is to use tools that provide developer-friendly browser-based metrics that are understandable out of the box. And this is something that, we'll show you in Load Ninja today. The third challenge we're going to talk about is laborious and costly investment to procure, set up, and maintain load test solutions. So the solution here is to use real browsers at scale for load tests to get a holistic view of how end users experience your application under stress. So Load Ninja is able to really give you a great picture of, an actual experience that these end testers or end users will be getting. So this is really, these are the topics where we see Load Ninja like all of our value propositions. This is the promise that we deliver to the market, and where we're really trying to create this cultural paradigm where load testing does not have to be hard, and it can be easy and much more accurate than you've seen in the last 30 years. So Load Ninja is the performance testing platform on the cloud to test web applications with real browsers at scale. So be it 1 user, 10 users, or thousands of users, these are all real users hitting your application at scale. And so we'll go through a couple of our core value propositions in Load Ninja. So the first one that we like to talk about is efficiency. And the gain you typically see is in the order of 50 to 70%. And that's primarily because, like I mentioned before, you're not having to do any sort of dynamic correlation or programming in order to get your scripts ready. So you don't have to worry about sessions, cookies, or any of those dynamic components. As long as your browser can interact with the application, you can essentially create scripts that can instantly be played back. The next thing is the accuracy element. If you are essentially using real browsers at scale to create the load, your end users are, not using emulators. Your end users are not using, a WebSocket or protocol to hit your application. They're using a real browser. So that's why Load Ninja is able to provide you with the most true sense of load on your application that a load testing tool can give you, because we're really showing you these load tests on actual browsers. And then the next thing is the actionable metrics, because we're giving you these real browser-based performance data, so you can be sure that this data is something that your end users actually see. And then finally, you can inspect and debug applications in real time, because we have real-time inspectors and debuggers that allow you to see how the test is progressing and debug any sort of client-side errors if needed from the JavaScript console. Okay, so now that we've talked about all of this, we have to talk about, what this looks like and how you can, implement these things in your current test flow. So the value propositions that I just mentioned allow you to spend a lot less time creating the scripts and playing them back, and analyzing that load, because it's something that's very easy for you to take a look at from our tool. So let's go through the information flow. So we'll start with setting up your script in Load Ninja, and then we'll go through the configuration steps for your load test parameters. And then you can very easily, either using a public Load Ninja API that we'll provide for you, or a Jenkins plugin that we also provide, have these scenarios be a part of your automated test suite, whether that's kicking off after you update your code or things like that. Load Ninja really allows you to build this right into your process. And the cool thing is that not only can you add Load Ninja to your build process and have those tests kick off automatically, but you can also take the results that we get from Load Ninja and you can push this into test management tools such as Zephyr for Jira. So you're actually able to give your managers or your stakeholders a more holistic view of how your application's performance is doing. So for every build to get a high-level view of what's passing or failing, this way you can identify performance problems rapidly and you can remediate these issues. These are visible right inside of Jira. So, and you can see, we'll see an example of that today as well. And then just one quick note, we do have a Jenkins plugin, but there are a lot of, CI platforms. So we do provide an API that you can use to integrate with those other CI tools. So we'll showcase Jenkins today, but if you use other CI tools, then you can still use this same process as well. So now we're going to go into the demonstration of Load Ninja. All right, let me just hold on here and get my Load Ninja opened up for you. Okay, so we're just gonna stop here for a quick second and answer a couple of the questions that we had come in. So let's see here. So hold on a second. So we had one question about using our load testing with dynamic data. And so the question was, excuse me, how to use load test with dynamic data. Does Load Ninja able to use upload file testing functionality? So yes, we do support data-driven testing. We do have the ability to go ahead and upload a file to your test case, and then you're able to data drive that, test case using the file that you uploaded in your test. So you can create one scenario and then iterate through multiple sets of data using a file. Okay, so we are going to head into the demonstration now. I know there are a lot of questions, so we're going to just start with the demo, see which questions get answered through that process, and then we will circle back around to make sure that those questions get answered. So what we have up on our screen right now is the Load Ninja dashboard. So what you can see here is the recent test runs, your recent projects, your recent test cases, and then all the way at the bottom you can see, how much time is left in your load testing, your Load Ninja platform with your plan. So, Load Ninja is the tool that you can use to automate your performance tests on your web applications. So we'll just walk through how we can do that here. So we're going to create a new project today. And once we create this project, you'll notice that our projects are broken down into three major components. So first we have our web test section. This is the section where you can see all of your, your user scenarios, and this is where you'll be creating the test cases that you'd like to apply the load to. The load test scenario section is where you're going to create the configuration for your load tests, and this may include Things such as the amount of virtual users that you'd like to use in your load test scenario. Also, things such as the ramp up time for these users and that type of information. So that's all going to be in the load test scenario section. And then the test run section is the place where we'll find the results of the load tests that have been run previously. And then you'll notice we do have a compare button. So if you wanted to, compare to a test run, maybe before you made updates to your application, you can do that using this compare button here. So we'll just get started with the, creation of a recording in here so you can see how quickly you're able to actually create a load test. So we'll start with our recorder. I'm going to just copy the URL from my sample application. And we'll paste this URL right into our recorder here. And I did select my resolution as well that I'd like to record my test on. So once we provided this information, we can go ahead and start our recording now. And everything that we do is going to get recorded, and then we'll be able to play back these steps in our test case. So I just performed a simple login and log out to my pet store application, and I'm going to stop my test case here. And you'll notice we do recommend that you play back your script at least once before you go ahead and apply a load to this test case, just to make sure that it's working as expected before you go ahead and apply that load. So we'll go right ahead and we'll play this back, and you'll be able to see how instantly you're able to play back this test without having to do any dynamic correlation or anything like that. And you can see on the left-hand side what steps we're going through on the ticker. So that will follow us through our test case here. And we are using our Load Ninja AI object recognition. So it is going to pick the best way to identify the objects in our test script here. So as you can see, our test did playback successfully. So we can go ahead and save this script, and we'll be able to add this to our load scenario. So we're not going to create a load scenario just yet. We are going to perform one other recording in which we're searching for a pet on our application. And I do want to point out as well, you'll notice these think times that are in between our steps. So this is really just this is actually the think time that it took me to go from step to step. So this way, when you play back your test cases, it's actually really seeming like someone is navigating through the steps in your application. So the next thing that we're gonna do here is just record one more script. And we'll use the same URL. So in this script, we'll be searching for a pet on the pet store, clicking on the pet, and then navigating back to our home page. And this is where we are going to incorporate a data bank into our test. That way we're able to maximize the test cases without having to spend a lot of time recording those cases. So you can use the add button here to go ahead and add a data bank to the test. And so we'll just use our CSV. It does have a header and it is comma delimited. And then we're going to just simply use this dog types column all the way on the left. Our final step here is to map this data bank to our test. So you can see here, I'm going to select the dog spreadsheet, and then I'm going to select the dog types column. And it will give us a preview of this data. So briefly, before we go on to the next thing here, I just do want to mention that Some other scenarios that we find that people are using a lot with databanks is you'll see that the URL is actually, an input as well. So if you wanted to load test different versions of your production application, you do have the ability to use the same test case on those separate URLs, and all you'll have to do is create a column in your spreadsheet that has the different versions of your application to be tested, and then you can actually cycle through those URLs as part of the test. The other scenario that we often see people using a data bank for is if you're maybe logging into your website using credentials, if you have 1,000 virtual users logging in and your application doesn't allow for those users to use the same username and password, you can have a spreadsheet that has unique credentials for each of those virtual users. And then we do have a setting to make sure that Load Ninja is using a unique set of data. So if you choose the unique setting here, that's going to make sure that as long as you have enough credentials for each virtual user, that they all are using a separate set at the same time. So you don't have people trying to log into the same account. So that's, we added our data bank here. So already we're able to run through many more test cases than we just recorded. And then the next thing I'm going to do is actually add a couple validations to our test script. So we give you 3 options here. You can go through JavaScript validation, SLA validation, and text validation. So if you wanted to create a custom validation, you can use the JavaScript. If you want to set a threshold for an amount of time that a page can take, you can use an SLA validation. And then if you want to validate that you see some information, maybe I want to validate that I did get the golden retriever result on my pet store, I can use the text validation as well. So we'll just set a threshold here for our search page. So I want to make sure that it doesn't take longer than 5 seconds to load my search. So I'm going to add that here. And then we're good to go. I'm just going to, we haven't played this back yet, so I'm just going to play this back before we go ahead and create our load configuration. So as you can see, it's going through exactly what we just did before, but this time it is using the data bank. So you'll notice instead of searching for a golden retriever, it did search for a bulldog. So we'll save this script as well. And then we'll go ahead and move on to the creation of our scenario. So we'll navigate back to our project. And the next step here is that load test scenario. So this is where we're going to be able to set up our configuration. How many virtual users would we like? Let's see here. We're going to give this 10 virtual users, and we'll go ahead and add both of the test cases that we just created. And you can see that we do have the ability to actually decide how we're going to distribute our load. So for example, we find that more people are actually searching for pets than actually logging into our website. So we're going to give the search script 80% of our load, and we're going to give logging in and logging out 20%. You are able to set the location of the load. We have, a few options here as far as where this load can be coming from. I'm just going to leave that as is. The next major thing here is the configuration, whether you're creating a duration-based test or an iteration-based test. So if you ever forget, what the difference is here, you can use the informational bubbles to get an explanation of what those mean. But briefly, duration-based would be, for example, you want your test to run for 5 minutes straight. It doesn't matter how many times the test actually execute. You just want it to run for 5 minutes. The other option is iteration based. So in this case, you would specify, say, for example, hey, I want this test to run 5 times, but it doesn't matter to me, if it takes 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and create an duration-based test. The ramp-up time is for how long you want it to take to actually get to your full load. So I'm going to give it 1 minute until we get to all 10 virtual users running tests. And then I'm going to define 5 ramp-up steps. So it's going to add 2 virtual users at a time over the course of a minute until we reach that maximum of 10 at the end of 1 minute. And again, this is another thing that does have an informational bubble if you do forget what the information means here. I am going to set my think time to a minimum just so that I can maximize the amount of times that my test is running. And then let's see here. This is another section at the bottom that actually sets LoadNinja apart. So with LoadNinja, since we're actually running these tests on real browsers, we allow you to, like I said earlier, go in and debug those virtual users. So I am going to hold those open for 2 minutes so that we can go in and take a look. So that's really all the configuration that we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and save this scenario, but instead of kicking this test off from inside of LoadNinja, we're actually going to kick this off from Jenkins, because the topic of this webinar is how you can, use LoadNinja in your continuous integration system. So we're going to go ahead and show you how you can actually kick this off from inside of Jenkins. So we'll create a new project here. It's going to be a freestyle project. And the steps to set this up are pretty simple. You'll have to go down to your build steps. You'll add a LoadNinja step, and you'll have to do this after you download the LoadNinja plugin for Jenkins. But once you get that downloaded, it's as simple as these steps that we're walking through now. So the first thing we need is our API key, and you can find that in your settings. So that will be under this section here. We'll copy this and paste this here in our build step. The next thing that we need is our scenario ID, and you can find that in LoadNinja where we created our configuration. So this is going to be the configuration ID that you need. And you can, of course, put the configuration for whichever load scenario that you would like to use. So that's the, the kicking off the test from Jenkins step. But then the other thing that we talked about today is the ability to actually push those results to a test management tool such as Zephyr. So the other thing that we're going to do here is add a step to post this here. So we have to publish JUnit so that Zephyr for Jira is able to interpret the results. So we'll add this step here, and then we'll also add this step to publish our test results to Zephyr for Jira. And you'll just have to set up your Jira instance in your global settings, and then this information will populate here. But we do have information on how to get this set up in our documentation. So you can always find that online if you're not sure how to go about doing this. So once you add your LoadNinja build step and then also the post build actions to send those results, you can go ahead and run your, or I guess build your project. So once we kick off our build, you're going to be able to see in LoadNinja that we have actually kicked off a test here. So it's gonna just take a second to get started. And you can see right here that we have kicked off this test run. So it's going to take a minute here for Load Ninja to connect to our server. But this is something that, again, takes us back to one of the values of Load Ninja. It takes this usually a minute or two to start up. And then, again, you don't have to manage any of these servers. You don't have to, maintain anything. You can record your Load Ninja tests, configure your scenario, and then you can kick these off almost instantaneously. So this is just something that, you have to wait a minute, but that's a lot easier than having to maintain all of this and setting it up yourself. So it'll just save you time in the whole process. So let's see here. While we're waiting, let's go back into our projects here and take a look at some of our previous test runs. So you can see that once I have more than one set of results, I can use this option to actually compare these. So we're going to get in a minute here, real-time results that are loading as we complete the load test. But I think it's nice to see that all of that information remains available in Load Ninja, and then you can actually use it to come in and take a look at maybe how things have changed from the first run of your load test to the second, especially if you're going into your application and making updates or, changing the features. So we should be able to start seeing our results now. Just take a second to load here. So what we can see is so far we have 3 of our virtual users running our test, and that's ramping up, over the course of that first minute. I like to start in the virtual user inspector. So this section of Load Ninja actually allows us to come in and see what's going on with some of the virtual users that are running our test cases. So we can take a look at these from here. So I think that's something that's really great, because the only reason we're able to actually see what's happening in those tests is because Load Ninja is actually running those on real browsers. The next thing that I do want to take a look at here is the virtual user debugger. So any of the virtual users that have experienced errors, we can actually come into this section here, click on the bug, and then we can actually take a look at the virtual user, where it was stuck, and then we can send commands to that JavaScript terminal. So this is somewhere where you can actually come in and start debugging instantly and work directly with that virtual user that is completing your test case. The next thing that I do want to cover here is the chart section, because this is something that gives you a great visual right off the bat. So right now, this is only showing my pet search script, because you are able to filter these charts according to what you'd like to see. So we're going to go with all of our scripts here, so just those 2 that we created. And what this chart shows is the average duration of each script and step. So in Load Ninja, duration is the time it takes to perform all the actions in a script or a test step. So this is going to give you a visual of that. The next chart that we see is our navigation timings. So this is showing the network timings as the virtual user is loading the page in its browser. And this includes a lot of different metrics. You can find on our website detailed information about what these each show. So if you're not sure exactly what the DNS time is, or you want to know how we're calculating these, you can take a look at our documentation, and it will explain all of those and how we calculate them. This is also a chart that you can actually filter. So if you only want to take a look at the response time or the DOM load time, you can use these filters to just look at this. And as you can see, we definitely had a spike right at the beginning there when we ramped up to our full 10 virtual users. The next chart here is our error count, and this is going to show the number of errors that occurred during each test run. So obviously the pet search had a couple. So I'm running a test that I did have a text validation in. And because I use a data bank, I basically forced errors in my application. Well, not my application, but the Load Ninja results, because I told Load Ninja to check for something that I knew wouldn't be there on every test run. The bottom chart that you can see here is our success rate. So this chart's going to show the percentage of steps within the script that pass successfully during the test run. And again, all of these charts are super visual, and it's very easy to come in, look at these results, and actually interpret what's going on. It's not going to take, the tester a long time to come in, interpret the results, and then finally send those over to the developers. You can actually have your developers in your Load Ninja tool, and then they can come and, take a look at these results, and they already have a very meaningful, view to them. So it's easy to understand results. You can see the spikes and that type of thing on the charts. And then if you see a certain area that you want to focus more of your time on, you can come into the chart section, and then you can actually see those charts broken down into specific numbers. So for example, we can take a look at the average duration of our pet search script. We have 3.36 seconds here. We can go down, we can look at the average response times, the average DOM time, load times. So all of this information is viewable here, and then it will be viewable after the test. So the final thing I just want to make sure we touch before we circle back and answer some of those questions is just showing you what we see in Jira. So the results won't populate in Jira until the Jenkins build step is finished, but you can see these two previous runs here are from Jenkins running my Load Ninja tests, and then you can see that we'll actually be able to see the information here that our Load Ninja test was run. And it's very nice to be able to come in here and look at the pass-fail results on a chart. And this is something that we mentioned during the PowerPoint, but that this is a great thing to be able to show your stakeholders, or your executives, so they can see how the performance testing is going for your application. So that's everything. Let's circle back around here and take a look at some of those questions. So let me just open those up. Okay, let's see here. So I'll just start going through them, and we'll get through as many as we can, and then the ones that are left over, we will come back to, and we'll follow up with you and make sure that you get those questions answered. So we have a question here. Let's see. Okay, so I think we just covered this. The question says, hi, I need to know how to manage test result, meaning once test automated, how to update the test result in Jira through Zephyr. So hopefully what we just saw, we were able to see that in Zephyr. So as long as you add the build step to your Jenkins, or you can also use the API to send those results over if it's not, if you're not using the Jenkins to kick those off, then you can use the API to send those results back. But if you are using Zephyr, then it's just going to be the steps that we just went through today. So we have, can Load Ninja be integrated with Visual Studio Team Services? So if you're asking about that question as far as CI and integrating that, maybe kicking these tests off automatically, then that is something that you can do with that API, and we do have that listed in the documentation. So let's see here. So we have a question about the demos using Jenkins plugin. Do we have a Bamboo plugin as well? At this time, it's just the Jenkins plugin, but like I said, you can use that API to go ahead and kick those tests off from other CI tools. Let's see. Where the reports see, sorry, where the reports that we saw shown the output of Jenkins. So those are specific to Load Ninja. So as long as you run your tests in Load Ninja, you will get those results. You don't have to run the test through Jenkins in order to see those results. Let's see. So we have a question, will the load test run on real browser instances? The answer to this question is yes. We do run these on real browsers. That's one of the major things that sets Load Ninja apart from other load testing tools. Let's see. So I think some of these other questions we're going to have to get back to you guys on. We do only have 2 minutes left, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up the session for today.
Yep, and just as a reminder, if you'd like to speak with Emma or any of our load testing expert following this webinar, I did include a link to our Calendly where you can book 15 minutes and we can go through some of your questions here in depth. Randy, I like that comment. That was funny. So again, I'll put the link back into the chat box so that you guys can all have access to it. Thank you so much for attending our webinar today. We really appreciate it, and we love the engagement, the questions, and definitely keep them coming. Keep an eye out for the webinar recording, which I will send out tomorrow. You'll be able to respond to that email as well, and that will go to me and Emma. And you can always schedule time with us to chat more about any specific questions you have. So looking forward to seeing you guys at the next one. In the meantime, I hope everyone has a good day.